Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Philosopher's Poet, and I'm here with worx. How are you doing this evening?
Hello, the Philosopher's Poets. Doing great tonight. So good to be doing another collaboration with you. It's been a long time coming, has it not?
Yes. Well, we've been doing our own thing independently, and we said we'd come back and do another video together. So here we are. We're here to talk about the power and the concept of the spiral, a universal constant and symbol used in many terms and many forms and many applications. I think what I'd like to do is, I guess, start off with your understanding and interpretation of the spiral, and how you've applied it to well-being and health. You produced some very interesting slides to me that I've been through that I had a look at them around sort of the spiral in nature and your application in using it for meditation and sort of manifestation techniques. So I'd love to delve into that a bit more.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, what was interesting, Nathan, was, I had seen a post of yours on Threads,
Yeah.
and it was actually on the spiral. And what I love about your sort of interpretation about sort of spirituality or anything in the realm of philosophy, it has a very kind of poetical stance. And so I guess when I saw this post about the spiral on Threads, it just ignited this thing within inside of me, because I had coincidentally just developed a well-being exercise on the spiral itself.
Yeah.
And so that's when I got in touch with you, and I was so excited. And I just thought, you know what? This would be an amazing opportunity to kind of do a collaboration with you, because on the one hand, you could explain to me your interpretation from a poetical, philosophical standpoint on the spiral. But so too, could I also offer you my interpretation of the spiral, but through the use of well-being exercises. So I think when you ask, like, what is my interpretation of the spiral, it's interesting because a lot of my work, in terms of how I work with clients and groups, it's actually their well-being exercises. So that can be a conglomeration of mindfulness and meditation and body work. But when we talk about specifically how the spiral works into a well-being exercise, I would say that the way I've used the spiral is actually through a mindful exercise, but also a body exercise. But so too is it also a meditational exercise. And what's so interesting is like when I develop an exercise, over the years of working with clients, they will give me feedback on an exercise, and I'll come up with 3 different versions of something. So there's a version A, a version B, a version C. And what's interesting about the spiral is that there are all of these different versions in the way that we can express our well-being. So there's version A is more of kind of like a somatic part where we utilize the spiral using our bodies. Version B is more of a mindful version where we close our eyes and use the spiral. And version C is purely a meditational version of the spiral.
Okay, that's very interesting. It reminds me of the various types of yoga that are practiced, and there are different forms of yoga apart from the ones that we practice mostly in the West, and they're to do with devotion and connecting with, let's say, the Brahma. We often associate yoga with just a physical exercise, which are good for us, but that's sort of almost like entry level. So that's for the body and leading to the mind. Then you have other forms of yoga that are focused on the mind and the spirit. And when I say yoga, I'm using that term loosely because anything can be a form of yoga, a form of devotion, a form of worship. When I use the word worship, I don't use it in a religious sense. More so yourself and that part of you which is often elusive and overwhelming and intangible. So that's fascinating. So the way I understood your techniques were focusing both on the body, mind, and spirit. There's sort of something for everything. It's a sort of all-round holistic practice that seems to cater for those three aspects of the human being, so to speak. That's how I interpret it. It makes sense because when I look at the spiral, I think of it as a concept. I look at it as sort of the beginning of the spiral probably concerns, maybe you could interpret it in a way as sort of the body, and as it moves out, it obviously it concerns the mind and the spirit. And the reason I've chosen to say as you go out to interpret it as the mind and the spirit is simply because as great as our body is, there are things that go way deeper than skin deep that affect us physically from the mind, and then even furthermore from the spirit or the things we hold inside of us. And I think the way the spiral unfolds or expands is just an indication of that which is required. And once we can attain that which is required to unlock it, then the power and our ability to connect with ourselves and love ourselves is exponentially greater simply because of the way in which the spiral unfolds, if you know what I mean. So the end of the spiral is considerably greater than the beginning of the spiral, in terms of the ratio and the actual circumference.
Yes. No, you know what? I really love that interpretation that you just shared with me about the body, the mind, and the spirit. And I actually hadn't thought about it from that standpoint. I think when I do the different versions, although now you say body, mind, and spirit, which is such a beautiful way to express it. When I created the different versions, it was more around a client's circumstance and need. So I offer them the well-being exercise, and I teach and I share with them the well-being exercise in its entirety. So we do version A and B and C, right?
Yeah.
But then I say to a client, okay, there are going to be days in which you don't want to use your body and you don't want to use somatics. You're just tired and you just want to close your eyes and you want to visualize the spiral from more of like a meditational standpoint. And so it offers something like that based on their circumstance and need. There are other days where I was sharing the well-being exercise with a client quite recently, but it was the version A, which is kind of more somatic, in which you use your body. And he was like, Amanda, it's so interesting. When I did version A, which is more the sort of somatic-based exercise, I really kind of felt like my body opening up. And all of the creaks and the pains and the stiffness, as it were, started to open up. And so I think what's interesting is with all of these different versions, it offers something different to the clients or to the group that I share it with based on their circumstance and need. And what's so amazing is like when we think of the spiral, what is the symbolism of the spiral? So we think of the spiral, it's transformation, it's development, it's growth, it's expansion. And, we were having this conversation before, we see the spiral in nature. We see the spiral in sunflowers. We see the spiral in galaxies. We see the spiral in nautical shells. We see the spirals in, curly hair, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
Our ear has the shape of a spiral. It is very much the essence of, what nature is made up of. So it's everywhere. And you had mentioned something about expressions, right?
Yeah.
You express the spiral in one way through a poetical, philosophical standpoint. I express the spiral through the stance of a well-being exercise the nature in itself is expressing the spiral in nature. So I think the context to use the spiral is just so powerful and all-encompassing.
It's virtually limitless, and it's because it's one of those symbols that we ourselves, as a creator, have devised to help us in our earthly experience to draw on power in an infinite number of ways. And really, the only limitation is our imagination and creativity for how we interpret. And there's no wrong interpretation of how you use a symbol. I was going to throw some other examples. So I was thinking of Celtic symbolism, and the spiral often signified the interconnectedness of life. The endless loops used to represent eternity, which is an interesting one. And then also, like Native American cultures, some of them viewed spirals as symbols of the Earth's energy and cycles. Because I think in a lot of ancient cultures, they didn't see time as linear or civilizations as linear. They saw them as cyclical. Civilizations rose and fell. And then you had sort of greater and lesser civilizations that were compared to states of metal or certain materials. And then you had spirals within spirals, basically, or even fractals, where you had sort of subsets of civilizations in growth and decline, which is really interesting. Obviously, that itself is amazing, because within a spiral, you could have an infinite number of spirals. I was thinking about that, like fractals have an infinite number of curls, and you keep going in, and there's an infinite number of curls and fractals in that same way. And it really is like as above, so below, sort of. Even the idea of Earth's energy and cycles, if we're not thinking about history and civilizations, and we think about the Earth's energy and cycles, do we not mimic the Earth in so many ways? So the embodiment of the cycles that the Earth goes through in terms of its key characteristics and turmoils is represented also within the human being and in the universe. In many ways, it's sort of a mirror image.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is so much depth to the spiral. There is so much depth. And I think, when I was sort of inspired by the spiral, it kind of actually came to me in meditation, interestingly enough. Yeah. I kind of, in my own well-being material, there's sort of certain symbols that will sort of come to me or sort of stand out to me in meditation a lot of the time. And there's the spiral. I mean, it's not sort of, it's a symbol that we're familiar with. It's not sort of this outlandish symbol. It came to me in meditation, and I just thought, wow, it just really stood out. And I thought, how can I use this? Why has the sort of spiral sort of popped out to me as an image in my mind in meditation? I thought to myself, how can I use this, to enhance well-being, right? So everything in my platform, it's all about, the whole angle is all about tools and ways in which a human being, right, can enhance their well-being. And I started working on the spiral. I was like, how can I use this? So basically, when I do an exercise, I practice it on myself to see if like I get any benefit from it, right? And I was immediately shifted. Okay. And then I thought, okay, right, that's great that the spiral works on me. I got to check now whether it works on other people. And I started working with other people, and there was a shift, And what's interesting is that when I create an exercise, I put it into a PDF worksheet for a client, and then I put it into PowerPoint slides. But what was so interesting, Nathan, is that when I started developing the PowerPoint slides, I had an image of the spiral on the PowerPoint slides. And I'm looking at the image of the PowerPoint slides, and I'm starting to write up sort of the slides, as it were. And just by looking at the spiral, just by focusing on it, I was immediately impacted. It was bizarre. And I think that there's something where if we can, as human beings, open ourselves up to the potential that the spiral has in order to enhance and transform our lives, then we open ourselves up to something actually quite magical and healing and transformative.
Yeah, I think if we open ourselves up to the use of the symbol of the spiral to understand or unlock our own innate power, we ultimately understand that the spiral, it's a bit of a, it sounds circular in one way, but actually it makes sense. The idea that the symbol of the spiral is only powerful because we've made it powerful, because we've understood and observed it from nature and understood that the way we see it physically is just a blueprint or a thumbprint of what happens in the background, in the ether, behind reality and within reality. The idea that a symbol is only as powerful as we make it. Therefore, we should take full advantage of the fact that we've created a symbol, a concept, the concept, the spiral, and we should employ it in the way in which we do with other symbols that people have associated with power, because we're the ones who infuse our energy in it and our vibration. And it was inspired by nature, for us and by us. It's human and human ingenuity at its greatest point, as in not being human ingenuity when we think about physically, but of the noumena, of the great unknown that comes down. In fact, actually, one other thing just crossed my mind as we were talking, that if you think about the sun, a lot of pagan rituals and traditions were obsessed with observing the path of the sun. Obviously, it's curved. It forms a sort of a clockwise spiral path in many teachings and many traditions, which is fascinating because it's almost as if we're saying that as the world goes through lightness and dark, so do human beings. So do we also go through our death and our rebirth. So even the celestial bodies are telling us something about the symbolism of the spiral.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's so beautiful is that when you like walk in nature, just
Yeah,
generally you feel good. I mean, I'm talking about from like a well-being perspective. When we sort of immerse ourselves in sort of the natural world, or we go for a walk in the park, we feel good, right? Our
yeah,
well-being is enhanced. And I think the idea is because so much of nature is made up of the spiral, right?
yeah,
I think the idea around, just as we connect with nature through a walk in the park or through a walk in the forest in order to enhance our well-being, right? So too can we, on a deeper level, connect with the spiral, which makes up a huge part of what nature is. And the more that we connect to the spiral, which is the basis of nature, just like we walk through the park, the more that we can enhance our well-being. So it's more kind of like a leaning into, it's kind of like a leaning into the spiral, and inviting the power and the symbolism and the metaphor of what the spiral can offer us in terms of self-transformation and healing and development. And the more that we invite it in and the more that we lean into it through the power of through the use of our well-being exercises, or through the use of studying it from an intellectual standpoint, from your angle, from the philosophical point, from the poetical point, from the well-being point, however we want to lean into the spiral, the more that we lean into it and the more that we invite the power of the spiral into our lives, the more we can enhance our well-being and live these magical lives.
yeah. I would agree with that. Lean into it, lean into the concept, make it work for us in whichever way we need it to work for us, whether that's in proximity to nature or through your exercises or through understanding what the symbolism behind it and really sitting with it and fixating on it in a way that we would if we were saying focusing on an object or even in a sense of connecting with it, whether that's in an abstract way or whether that's physically trying to touch and connect with something in a way that people do with other with other things, material things. When I previously looked at the spiral, because I think I know which post you're talking about, I think I was referring to the spiral as this abstract concept of that is likened to karma or learning in life or development. So in life, we often have to confront our own internal fears and challenges and overcome them. They're sort of hero's journey, so to speak. And as we do as human beings, it's of my opinion that as the spiral expands, so does our ability to take on and overcome any further challenges associated with karma. And this isn't in a negative sense, it's in a learning sense, becomes. So if we have trauma, for example, and we need to overcome something, well, the first step, that the innermost part of the spiral deals with us coming into contact with that, something that forces us to confront our internal struggle, our internal trauma. I believe once we overcome it, then the spiral continues, because what will happen is often in life, healing is not a sort of single step process. It's something that we have to do over time, and we go deeper and deeper. And so the next revolution of the spiral basically requires more of us in terms of digging deeper to overcome the challenge, to better understand and heal ourselves. It works the other way if you avoid the spiral as a concept in terms of life presenting you with challenges that you avoid. Then in a way, life then compounds you or compels you to resolve that issue by bringing an even greater issue, simply because the spiral will expand even if you stay still. The spiral is moving, the spiral is expansive. So if we choose to stay still as human beings in terms of our development and progress, then the actual what is required for us to start healing ourselves actually becomes even more drastic's the wrong word. It actually becomes more, let's say, in your face. So, the idea of avoiding problems, but one day the mother of all problems comes up that forces you to confront everything you buried down. And if you chose to confront it initially, maybe it's liken this to weight 1 ton of problems, and you've avoided, so now you have 10. So in a way, it's a great healer and therapeutic law in the sense of or concept, because you need to confront it, whether you're choosing to avoid it or you are constantly challenging yourself to overcome, to understand yourself and to understand what's buried in your subconscious, why we avoid certain things, why we lack love for certain things, why we have certain fears and lack of love for ourselves. So that can be a gentle journey, or it can be quite a turbulent journey, depending on whether we choose to move with the spiral or we choose to be stagnant.
Well, I think that's an interesting viewpoint, because if we think about the spiral, in terms of our own, if we were to think about the spiral in terms of our development, and you've spoken a lot about getting stuck and trauma and that kind of stuff and not being able to move, I think the idea is if we can, and I love this word, invitation. It's a word that I use a lot in my well-being sessions, because it's like you can choose to accept the invitation.
Yes.
Well, you don't have to. So it's like you're sitting at home and the invite to the party goes under the door, and it's sat there under the floor, and it's your choice whether you want to open up the invitation and go to the party, right?
Yeah.
It's also your choice Whether you're like, I'm not going to respond to this invitation, you throw the invitation in the trash. It doesn't matter. The idea is that the spiral is inviting you, right?
Yes.
And I love this word because you can either choose to be invited and go to the party or not. So the spiral is inviting you. So the invitation is there. And the way I see the spiral is that it is in one way, shape, or form, it is a tool, right? The spiral is a tool. So you've spoken about, having issues, getting stuck, trauma, or whatever. What the spiral is going to do for you from a well-being perspective, if you want to deal through your trauma and if you need healing and if you're getting stuck, what's great about the spiral is that it has movement.
Yes.
So the minute you feel stuck, the minute you feel I've got trauma, I need to heal, open up yourself to the power of the spiral, because once you bring that spiral in, once you start bringing in that movement, the spiral is moving, the spiral is expanding, it's getting bigger, it's getting bigger, it's getting bigger, you're expanding, you're bringing that in. You can't be stuck.
Yeah.
You can't, because the spiral isn't moving. And as the spiral is moving and expanding and growing and developing, you are too, because you're moving with the spiral, so that the trauma that you had is being broken up because the spiral is moving outwards. The healing that you need is expanding, and you're becoming healed through the process of the spiral, and you're not stuck anymore.
No.
Because you're moving. You're moving outwards like the spiral, just like the expansion of the consciousness of the universe and nature, if that makes any sense.
Yes. So if the universe is about movement and the spiral represents reality, then we will have no choice but to move. I think, interestingly, we've been saying a similar thing, but we've been saying it on two sides of the same coin. I think maybe the way I came at it is from the shadow side, and the way you come from it is from the light side, let's say, because I've used language in accordance with therapy and the idea of overcoming challenges that we have, but being forced to overcome challenges and not do the healing. Where you've said in other words, you've said it's an opportunity, and both those things aren't diametrically opposed. They're actually consistent with one another, but they are, one's from the dark, one's from the shadow side, and both are required within life. They're interchangeable depending on your need. But what you said is absolutely correct. And when you said opportunity to go to the party, well, I kept
invitation.
The invitation, the missed opportunity to understand what inner joy and inner peace feels like, and having to wait again and wrestle with that. The idea that you're missing out on something that maybe seem challenging and scary, but actually it will be the first day of the rest of your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's well, with the word invitation, it's like, you don't have to go to the party, you don't have to use the spiral.
Yeah.
But it's there for you if you should so choose to give the spiral an opportunity, right? Give it a go. Open up the door to the spiral.
Yeah.
Accept the invitation to the power and the symbolism of what the spiral can do to you. And the minute you start opening yourself up, the minute that you open up that door to the spiral, the minute that you accept the invitation to the power of the spiral, it's going to start opening up stuff for you. And what's interesting is that, when I share these well-being exercises, any well-being exercise, but also specifically the spiral, I believe that the spiral has the ability to work in a certain way with a certain client based on their circumstance and need. And what I mean by that is that the minute that the client or the group that I'm working with opens themselves up to the invitation and the potential and the opportunity of the transformative power of the spiral, the healing, the transformation, the development, wherever that needs to go. Now, that may be healing within the physical body. That may be psychic transformative healing. That may be transformative healing and development from a mental perspective. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The healing will happen if you bring in the spiral, and the healing will go exactly where it needs to go. So one client may use the spiral and may be affected in and benefited in a different way to how another client may be affected and benefited in their own way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. People will use it as they see fit for where they need
Yes.
to need expansion, almost like the opposite of saying the spiral meets you where you're at. And
I love that.
You know what's so fascinating about this? You
Love
could
that.
swap the spiral out in essence with many spiritual and religious symbols, even though we're not talking about any particular movement. We're just talking about the concept and the power of the spiral and the power of symbolism, actually. So this is really interesting because, you know, this is that quote I just said. That's often a quote that's used in a lot of, for example, churches. And you can sub that and say, actually, I don't worship any particular God, or I don't have the particular belief system. You can apply this and not be wedded to any particular dogma.
That is so true. That is so true. And I just, you know, I'm just so struck. That is just so beautiful when you said the phrase, the spiral will meet you where you're at.
Yeah.
And I just think that is just so powerful. So powerful, because I completely agree with you. No matter what religion you're attached to, whether you're a religious person or not, whether you believe in God or not, it doesn't matter, you know, culturally, where you're from, what kind of belief you have. If you just open yourself up to the perspective of the spiral as a tool, it will, as you say, the spiral will meet you where you're at. So if you're coming from a religious standpoint, no problem, great. The spiral will meet you there. If you're atheist, if you don't believe in anything, it doesn't matter, because it's simply a tool to help you transform and heal and enhance your well-being.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Certainly. Precisely. Yeah.
I love this conversation because it's like, you know, from my perspective, I see the spiral from a well-being perspective, you know, and sharing it and teaching it and speaking about the spiral, you know, from the angle that I'm coming from. And the reason why I was so excited to do this with you, and the reason actually why I do collaborations with you, it's because you come from a very kind of like, you know, there's that sort of, it's more intellectual and it's philosophical and poetical. And it's just amazing how, even though we express ourselves in different ways, there is, as you say, a lot of common ground in which we're expressing and interpreting the spiral, which is just so interesting.
Yes, no, certainly. Even the idea of coming at something from a different angle or viewing through a different lens, the same sort of source, trying to get to that source and tap into it, and the understanding of how the symbol connects to that source. Even if you were to take people and plot them along a spiral, whether they're closer or further away along that path, the path's not linear, but people can see where they need to get to. If we're looking at it in an inverse way, and we're talking about getting to source, then now instead of going expanding, you're trying to go back within and be reborn. For example, many people can see the end game, the source, but many people see it from different angles. And the idea is for everyone to understand they're seeing the same thing, and the objective is the spirals there to help us understand it. It's the different angles and perspectives that might sometimes hinder us from seeing that everyone's walking towards the same path. If our aim was to meet the center of the spiral, to connect back to oneness or singularity, to go back into the womb and come out again, so to speak, metaphorically speaking.
Well, that's kind of an interesting concept, actually, because when you think about the spiral, it goes outwards in a clockwise motion, right? So when we think about the spiral as we know we're going out in a clockwise motion, we think about like growth, expansion, healing, development as it goes further and further out. As I was doing my research on the spiral, there is the anti-clockwise spiral. So it can go starting from the outside, going inwards.
Yeah.
And that is a different interpretation, and that it's more kind of like, just as the spiral goes clockwise and has that sort of expansive, transformative rebirth element, so too does the anti-clockwise spiral have a different element to it. So if I was maybe to do a different angle on the well-being exercise, I've actually done it before. The well-being exercise that I've created solely goes in a clockwise direction in terms of growth and expansion with the clients. But an interesting idea, if I was to do a different take on it and do it within an anti-clockwise, it could almost be using that to go to kind of center in, to bring in focus. So it's going in anti-clockwise and you're sort of getting smaller and coming in back to that grounding point, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, so interesting. As you were saying that, I guess another way you could interpret this is often when we think about, let's say, ascension, we think about obviously ascending from the crown to our higher selves, or we think about a ladder going from heaven to earth. These are just terms. And we think about chakras. And quite often, one of the big challenges of being a human being is either being too connected to the ground and not to the air, or the other way around, where we're too connected to the air and not to the ground, where we become reluctant to live a material existence. That's not meaning that we're ruled by materialism. It just means we have to remember that we're having a twofold experience. And so in one sense, the expansion helps us reach our hands for the air and understand us in a non-physical or non-material personage. And on the other hand, going inwards might actually be interpreted in some ways as reaching within and being grounded. And you need both. You need to be connected to both, for example, heaven and earth, or the body and the spirit, or the divine mind, in order to coexist in this world and be both practical and idealistic in how you address the problem of with ourselves as conscious beings, and that can be achieved on both the ground and in the air, so to speak.
I love that. So just as we can use the spiral in a clockwise motion to expand, develop, and reach out to the galaxies and the cosmos, into divine wisdom, right? So too, can we use the idea of the anti-clockwise spiral that brings ourselves towards ourselves, that brings ourselves inwards to the core of who we really are, of where it all began, right? From inside of us. And I think that what's so interesting, and I know that you say that we sort of say the same things in different ways, and so I'll replicate what you were saying, but in a different way. The idea is that, you know, whichever way you want to look at it, we're human beings on the planet. Planet Earth having a human experience. You know, it's one thing to kind of be quite sort of lofty and out there spiritually and in the clouds and not really grounded and not really on planet Earth. And we can get there through the use of the outward spiral. But at the end of the day, you know, we're living in a physical body on planet Earth, right? So just as we have to be connected to the heavens, as it were, an expansion of consciousness, so too do we actually have to be connected into our physical bodies.
Yes, yeah.
On this physical plane, on this physical planet, living as a human being in a physical body, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's what you were saying. It's a twofold experience through the use of the spiral, clockwise and anti-clockwise.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. If I was an aesthetic practitioner or I was into Kundalini, I would say there's a reason why self-mastery involves mastering the root chakra and the actual and attaining enlightenment of the crown, if you see what I mean. And both are necessary.
I love that. This is so brilliant. So you could see the beginning. I'm just trying to think if you were kind of to combine sort of the 7 chakras, as it were, in alignment with the spiral, so to speak, you could somehow incorporate, so as we go inwards, as we go outwards, the end spiral would probably mean like the top chakra, right? It would be the first chakra as the spiral expands outwards. But if you were to do it clockwise to come back, if you were to do an anti-clockwise spiral to come back, you would go back to the base chakra in the pubic bone, if that makes sense. So you're coming back into the physical body. And I think, and I never actually thought about that, the combination of the spiral with the use of the 7 chakras, which is actually so fascinating.
Yeah. And because it's immutable and dynamic and fluid, you can use it either way. You can use it inversely, or you can use it the other way around, depending on the purpose of how you conceptualize working towards healing and self-mastery. Also the idea of transmitting ideas from your higher self or the great unknown or source through your mind and then to your body and actioning that. That's another one. And because we need a medium to transmit that information and turn it into ideas, or what we do with it practically. And so the spiral can also represent that if we wanted to. It's so fluid and interchangeable, because that's the way the universe is as well. And that's the way human beings should be in the exchange of ideas and beliefs. We should have the freedom to move from one to the other if it helps us get closer to source or self-identity. And when we said that, we talked about stagnation. So the only real stagnation we have is imposed beliefs, imposed so-called immutable beliefs about reality, where we're not ready or subject or open to change. And that's the resistance that sometimes causes the difference of opinion, or the really fundamentalist ideas of I'm right and you're wrong, for example, or we can both see reality, but I'm now going to tell you I've seen it this way, so you must do what I do,
Absolutely. And I think when I was sort of studying the spiral, a big word that came out in terms of the symbolism of it was rebirth. And I think it's such a beautiful, the spiral just, again, it gives us this opportunity and this invitation to be able to give ourselves the opportunity to have this rebirth. In whatever way, shape, or form you want to have a rebirth, whether that's wanting to learn more, wanting to become fitter, or wanting to become more spiritual. It's this opportunity to use this tool for this magnificent rebirth. And to be able to have that opportunity through the power of the spiral is just, it's so exciting. It's so exciting. And as you said, whether you use the spiral as a tool in the form of rebirth, it can be body, somatic, it can be spirit, and it can also be sort of from a mental perspective. And what's interesting is just as nature is growing and developing and sort of rebirthing in its own way, shape, or form, we can mimic that rebirth of nature as it grows and expands, and bring that into the purpose of our own lives. So we're constantly growing, constantly. I mean, even this conversation, Nathan, the spiral is very present in the very essence of this conversation. As you and I are talking, right?
Yeah.
You and I have both accepted the invitation of the spiral. And so it's interesting because at the start of this conversation, I had ideas about the spiral, right? But we've both brought in the concept of the spiral in terms of great growth, transformation, and self-development. And even after this time speaking to you, I've, interestingly enough, felt a growth, I felt a transformation, and I felt a development through the conversation and use of the transformative symbol of the spiral.
And I have really enjoyed this conversation, my own expansion and challenging my ideas myself. And what it brings to the point is that there's no one truth about the spiral. There are truths. So there are many truths about the spiral, and that's fine as long as they line up with the universal law of love and growth. Anything that gets you towards that, then we can say that. Just as much as there might be a big truth out there, there are also many things that are truths that human beings can tap into and gain from a particular narrative, story, symbol, even though the symbol might not directly represent that as the truth. They are all truths because they accentuate an aspect or characteristic of divine nature of source.
Yes, I love that. And I think, if we were to think of a square, I hate to bring the square into it. You have a square and you've got the corners.
I've been called square many a times in my life. So yeah.
You don't want to call big. Nobody wants to be too square in this conversation. So if we were to think about a square, and obviously the literal and sort of metaphorical saying, oh, that person's quite square, they're quite rigid. We think of the square, sort of, it's got its four sides and it's sort of quite sort of structured, and there's not movement in it.
Yeah.
But if I was to compare a square, for example, and then compare the spiral, there is nothing rigid. There is nothing closed about the spiral, just as the square is, right? The square is closed off. It's got its very sort of concise corners. Everything is closed off. There is nothing closed off about the spiral. There is nothing angular about the spiral. The magnificence of the spiral, in fact, is that it's because it is opposite to a square, in that there is nothing closed off. So riding on the point where you're talking about there are many truths, right? So if you were to talk about like avenues of truth and you were to think of the spiral, each layer within the spiral as it goes outwards is a layer of truth.
Yeah.
Each outward spiral is an interpretation of the truth. And everybody has their own truth. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost kind of like the spiral is this ongoing, developing, transformative process of lots of different truths, as you say, and it is constantly growing and it is ever developing and it never stops.
Yeah, in fact, because even a square, even though it might be quite rigid and static, even that has a purpose and a use at the beginning. It serves as a foundation. So if you were to say we begin with solid moral principles about what I must do that's right or wrong, and then if we take the idea of the square and we soften the edges until it becomes an oval or a circle, that might be the next stage where we understand that we can be seen as nothing or infinite or made of infinite parts, in a way in which a circle can have 0 sides or infinite sides, if you think about it. And then the third phase and transition of us being goes from the circle to the spiral, where we collapse into ourselves and understand ourselves as one continuous single point that moves out over time, rather than being a fixed point with infinite sides that's expressed as a closed shape or closed being.
Yeah, and I love that idea, because it's kind of like it's not fixed. So it's kind of like the idea, once we lean into the invitation of the spiral, it's like, so it's not closed and it's ever transforming and ever expanding, right? But if we were to think about as human beings, about like having 5 senses, right? And we always, we talk about the sort of the sixth sense, as it were, the spiritual, psychic sort of sixth sense, as it were. I quite like the idea of the spiral in terms of our experience as human beings, that there is this sort of transformative ability and power when we use the spiral to start expanding ourselves and bettering ourselves, not just as like an individual per se. I mean, I use the spiral and I share the spiral, with my clients to enhance their well-being. But I think structurally, and when you look at it objectively, the human experience, right? We can use the spiral as a human collective to be able to transform ourselves as human beings into a more evolving and more improved and more conscious society as a human species, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. There are just so many ways to take the symbol of the spiral and apply it to ways in which we can focus on evolving or increasing the vibration of us as a species, as a model, as a concept. And it's only got that power because we created it with that power. As I said, it was our divine right. It was within us. It always was. It's just that, unfortunately, the way humanity is at the moment, the power of symbolism and the spiral, for example, it has been used obviously in for other means, in far more sort of, let's say, material means. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's more, say, it's not what we do, it's why we do something. When I say that, what I mean is symbolism is both powerful in the spiritual realm and in the commercial realm, in commerce, in marketing. So the application of such symbols and the infusion of power and emotion into them, we just need to understand that there are far-reaching consequences to what we do with symbols and our intention.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings me to the point around intention.
Yeah.
Right. And so especially when I'm doing group work with this, I'm sort of quite clear about we all know about the power of positive thinking, right? And there's actually been a lot of studies on positive psychology and positive thinking, and that if we incorporate positive thinking, that there's so many benefits to that, to reducing illness, to increase lifespan, to be able to handle, problems better, that are quite challenging for us, to increasing happiness. And so I think the idea is that my idea is that if you incorporate the essence of the power of positive thinking, right? And we're talking about intention here, because you were talking about how it can be used in differing ways, sort of light and dark. But the angle that I'm coming from is, if you incorporate the power of positive thinking through the power of your intention, knowing that the symbol of the spiral can benefit you, then you couple the power of positive thinking with the symbol of the spiral. And through that combination and through that intention, you are able to then transform your life and enhance your well-being. But I think, as you said, there is always a flip side, right? Is how are you going to intend to use the spiral? Is it through the purpose and power and intention of positive thinking? Or are you choosing maybe a different means, right? So it's intention for me, if that makes any sense.
And that really just falls within our hands as human beings. Our destiny is in our hands, and getting to where we need to can be as easy or as hard as we like, depending on how we choose to use our own power and abilities, and ingenuity and creativity and all the other great things we have, and that we've developed that are there, that we have within us.
And that brings us to choice. And that's the amazing element of being a human being. Somebody once said to me, oh, the angels, they don't have any choice, they have to do what God tells them to do. But human beings are blessed with this incredible thing such as choice, right? So the choice is yours. Are you going to choose to accept the invitation? And if you accept the invitation, are you going to choose to use it from a positive aspect, with your intention, with the power of your positive thinking, with the power of the symbol to integrate two of those things? So it's really your choice. And again, it's the power of us as human beings to be able to choose with intention, positivity, and moving forward through the use of the spiral.
I 100% agree. I mean, I was going to say, because I got sidetracked a bit in my thinking around the idea of angels and free will, but that's a conversation for another day. That we obviously we have the freedom and free will to apply it how we want to, and at the end of the day, if we apply in a way which has adverse results, then at least it tells us what we don't want as a human species. And that surely drives us closer towards what we do want and truly do desire. The only limiting factor here is whether the price we pay to get what we need to, or to accept the invitations, becomes too great for those who are either too obsessed with acquiring power and wealth.
Yes.
For example, so it's entirely in our hands, but that just shows us how powerful we really are.
But it also comes back to that phenomenal phrase that the spiral will meet you where you're at, right? So just as I've been saying, through the coupling, as it were, the combination of using positive thinking with the power of the symbol to benefit your well-being, so too will the spiral also meet you where you're at.
Yes.
If you're coming from a sort of a more darker angle, it's going to have adverse effects, right? So the spiral will meet you where you're at. Which path are you going to choose? What's your intention, right?
Yeah, definitely. Wow, no, this has been a really good conversation.
It has. Time's gone quickly.
Yes, yeah. I wonder, just as we sort of come to the close of this, whether you want to give out your socials again, social media.
Yes. If anybody wants to follow me on my wellbeing platform, I'm at self-worx on Instagram, SELF_WORX. Give me a follow on Facebook if you want. Self-worx, SELF_WORX. The same with LinkedIn, and the same with TikTok and YouTube. Please do give me a follow. I'd love to have you join in on the fun.
Yeah, and obviously I'm the Philosopher's Poet. You can find me on Instagram. Check out my website and WordPress, thephilosopherspoet.com, and check out my TikTok account with some shorts and select poems and as well. So thank you very much, everyone. And last but not least, as the Philosopher's Poet, the world spins with me and also with you.
Thank you, Philosopher's Poet. It's been an absolute pleasure
Same here. And we'll speak again soon.
And we will definitely do another collaboration soon.
Yeah.
All the best. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining in.
Bye.
Blessings. Love and light.